Welcome to another exciting edition of Reading with Mr. Eble. Still reading Grenade. So we'll be reading pages 180 to 196 today. This chapter is called Typhoon of Steel. Here we go. Hideki made a rectangle with his fingers and squinted, framing an imaginary photograph. All around him, thousands of Okinawan refugees and Japanese soldiers trudged south in the pouring rain. The Japanese soldiers didn't even stop to go to the bathroom. They urinated as they jogged along the muddy highway, none of them willing to pause for even 30 seconds. They had to get to the next line of defensive caves before the Americans caught up. Hidden among them, Hideki was just one of tens of thousands of people clogging the roads. The highway would take them through Shikina to Ichinichi-bashi, and that's as far as Hideki needed to go. Ichinichi-bashi was where his sister would be. Hideki had never been this far south before. Wherever he was, it didn't look like Okinawa anymore. American bombs had knocked down trees and taken the tops off hills, stomping the landscape flat like an angry god. Entire villages were shattered, the wooden houses and barns reduced to toothpicks. There were no color to anything anymore. The people, the ground, the sky, they were all a dull, filthy gray-brown, like all the paints on an artist's palette had been swirled together in a muddy mess. This wasn't Okinawa, not the Okinawa that Hideki knew and loved. Hideki had always used his fingers to frame what he was seeing in front of him, the way the photographer had taught him. But now he did something different. Now he used the frame to imagine the way Okinawa had been before the Americans had invaded, before the Japanese army had brought in cannons and built bunkers. He saw brilliant white coral sand roads lined with waving green palm trees, thatched wooden barns, square houses with red terracotta roofs, women in blue bashufu kimonos with babies strapped to their backs, going to the market, old men in brown bashufu and round straw hats, leading water buffalo to the sugarcane fields. Everywhere he looked, the bright memory of before overlaid the gray, miserable after, like his fingers were making a window into the past, a past that was so recent, so real to him, that he could almost reach out and touch it. Something moved in the corner of Hideki's eye, and he glanced sideways, but nothing was there. I know, he told the ghost of Ray. I'm sorry, I'm trying. Kimiko will be able to help us. We just have to find her first. But how will I ever find her in all this? Hideki wondered. An American fighter plane came roaring right up behind the long line of people, like it was following the highway. It flew so low that Hideki could make out the face of the pilot. Everyone ducked and screamed, but the plane didn't shoot at them. It roared up into the sky and circled high above them for a few seconds before disappearing into the clouds. The Japanese soldiers among them shoved Hideki and the other Okinawans out of the way as they ran off in all directions, and Hideki suddenly understood. The plane was a spotter for the battleships offshore. It had probably already radioed in where the crowds were. Incoming, get down, Hideki yelled. He dove off the road into a water-filled ditch as the first shell exploded right in the middle of the highway. The blast was deafening. Hideki held his breath and put his head under the water. The muffled boom shook him and rocked the ground, and he squeezed his eyes shut and drew his arms and legs in tight. Mud and rock and shrapnel pelted him. His world was hellfire and destruction for longer minutes than he could count, punctuated only by quick gasps of air. At last the bombing stopped. Hideki waited under the water until his lungs burned so much he had to breathe, and he lifted himself up on his hands and knees. The road was gone, and so was everyone who had been on it. Those who had been outside the target area, those who had been spared, got to their feet and hurried on through the carnage, leaving the wounded behind. And Hideki, his eyes dry and his heart hard, did the same. Next chapter. It's called Family. It was safer to travel by night, when the American planes weren't flying and the battleships weren't shooting, but Hideki was exhausted. He had to find some place to sleep. He broke away from the refugees and soldiers plodding south, and soon came to a family tomb. Hideki almost cried with relief. He staggered inside, hoping the ancestors resting there would forgive him for invading their home for one night. But the ancestors weren't the ones he needed to worry about. The family who owned the tomb were already hiding there. There were 8 of them. A mother, father, grandmother, grandfather, and 4 small children, all huddled in the back. I'm sorry, Hideki told them. I just need to get in, out of the rain. I need to sit down. He didn't wait for them to say yes. Hideki's weary legs gave out and he flopped to the floor of the tomb. It was all he could do to keep his eyes open. He let his pack slip off his back for the first time that day, and he slumped over, absolutely exhausted. The family crept over to meet him and introduced themselves. Their last name was Miyagi. They each told him their first names too, but Hideki was too tired to remember any of them. They had been living in this tomb since the battle began, they told him. Not one of them had been outside in 2 months. They still had water, but their food had run out 5 days ago. The littlest of the children looked shrunken, like his body was eating itself from the inside out, and they all had hollow eyes and sunken chins. They looked like ghosts, Hideki thought to himself, like their long-dead ancestors resurrected. Hideki thought of his father, perhaps never to be buried in the Kenishiro family tomb, and he sagged. "Why didn't you evacuate?" Hideki finally asked. "Why did you stay?" "We thought the Imperial Japanese Army would protect us," Father Miyagi said. "This is our home," Grandfather Miyagi added. "This is where our ancestors live." Hideki closed his eyes and nodded. It was the same answer he would have gotten from any of the refugees streaming south. "This is our home. The Japanese will protect us." One of those things was true. The other was far from it. "Are the Americans really coming this way?" Mother Miyagi asked Hideki. Hideki was too tired to lie to them. "Yes," he said. The children gasped and clutched at each other. "Is it true that what they say, that the Americans are monsters?" Father Miyagi asked. Again, Hideki wanted to tell them the truth. But what was the truth? "Yes," he told them, "and no. When they're fighting, the Americans are killing machines. When they're not, they're like us." Hideki pulled a wet tangle of bandages from his head. "One of their doctors fixed me when I was hurt," he told the Miyagis, "and they'll give you food if you ask for it." Hideki pulled his pack around and fished out what was left of the ration boxes. They were coated with a waxy substance that helped keep them dry from the rain. The crackers were fairly disintegrated, but there was some chewy gray stuff, a few practically indestructible candy bars, and the meals in the tins. Hideki cracked one of the cans open, and Grandfather Miyagi cried out longingly at the delicious smell. Hideki took a bite to show them it was all right and offered it to the family. "It's not poisoned," Hideki promised them. "I've already eaten one, and I didn't get sick." The Miyagis were too hungry to refuse. They fed the children first, and Hideki gave a second can to the adults. They all ate with relief, moaning gratefully. "I don't understand," Grandmother Miyagi said when she finished eating. She had black squares and circles and arrows tattooed on the back of her hands, just like the kind old woman who had tried to help Hideki get rid of Raise Boy in the cave. "You say the American devils were nice to you, but we were told they would kill our babies." "No," Hideki said. "They're only monsters when they're afraid, just like the Japanese. All the Japanese and Americans care about is killing each other. You should surrender to the Americans." "Surrender," Father Miyagi said, "but they'll kill us." "Not if you go to them now," Hideki replied. "If you wait until they're fighting, until they've all become monsters, they'll eat you up. Do you understand? If you surrender to them without threatening them, they'll help you." Hideki's suggestion caused a great deal of discussion, but he was too tired to be a part of it. After eating a bit of candy bar, he laid his head on the American backpack and went to sleep. When Hideki woke, the Miyagi family had made a decision. "We're going to surrender," Mother Miyagi said. Father Miyagi didn't look happy about it, but there wasn't much to argue about at this point. They had run out of food. They wouldn't have lasted a day or two more if Hideki hadn't come along, and he was out of tin cans. "Will you take us to the Americans?" Grandfather Miyagi asked Hideki. It would be going backwards a little way for Hideki, but he agreed. He walked with Miyagis out of the tomb, back out into that awful rainy darkness, and led them the way he had come. He wasn't moving forward anymore. He had been going back for days now. Now he was going back again. But this time it felt right, like he was walking toward something at last. The American soldiers had made camp for the night. They weren't fighting, but they were wary. Hideki made sure that the soldiers could see and hear them coming in the darkness. And soon flashlights were shining in their faces, blinding the poor Miyagis who hadn't seen daylight in more than 2 months. The Miyagis had tied a white cloth to a pole, and Father Miyagi waved it frantically. An American who spoke bad Japanese demanded to know who they were, and Hideki answered back in slow Japanese that they were Okinawan refugees. The grenade in Hideki's pocket had never felt heavier, more conspicuous. He was sure the Americans would see the bulge and shoot him. But after a tense few minutes of interrogation, the Americans finally lowered their lights and their weapons, and someone came to meet the Miyagis. Hideki tried to slip away into the darkness, but Mother Miyagi saw him. "Aren't you coming with us?" she asked. Hideki was tempted. He knew the Americans would give him food, shoes, a dry place to sleep. They would take him away from the fighting, the death, all this misery, all this suffering would be over for him. But not for Kimiko. "No," he told her. "I have to keep going south to find my sister. I have to make sure she's safe. She's the only family I've left." Mother Miyagi suddenly pulled Hideki into a hug. He was old enough these days to grumble through a hug from his own mother. But she was gone now, and it had been so long since he'd felt a warm embrace. Hideki let Mother Miyagi hug him, and he hugged her back. Ichirabi Chudi, she said in Okinawan. It meant, now that we've met, we're family. Hideki nodded. Thank you, Hideki, she added, releasing him. I hope you find your sister. The American soldiers took the Miyagi family away to safety, and Hideki slipped away, headed south once more in search of Kimiko. The next chapter should be a goodie. It's called The Toilet Sauna. Sounds good. Hideki slogged along the highway with thousands more Okinawans and Japanese. When the crowd reached Shikina, a village just outside Naha, some of the IJA soldiers detoured to a command post cave. Hideki decided to go with them. He was leery of setting foot inside another cave with Japanese soldiers, but he needed something more to eat if he was going to have the energy to find his sister, and the command post would have food. Just the thought of eating made Hideki's head swim and his knees weaken. Almost all his best memories of food were wrapped up with memories of his family. His little brother Isamu slurping long Okinawa soba noodles with him at the Lantern Festival. His mother dishing out a big bowl of Goya champaru, a sloppy, delicious mix of bitter Goya melon, and whatever else was in season, whenever their cousins visited. He and his father eating rafuti, the brown sugar-glazed pork belly, so delicate it fell apart in their hands, burning his mouth on deep-fried sata andagi, a kind of round donut ball, at a food stall with Kimiko on the way home from one of her Utah house calls. Hideki began to miss his family more than he did a warm meal, and then his appetite for food was erased completely by the sight and smell that greeted him at the command post. The post was hot, humid, and stinky. Buckets of human waste festered in the corridors. Bags of fermenting, ruined rice sat in puddles of water on the floor. Soldiers walked around in nothing but their loincloths to battle the heat. No one here had bathed in months. Command officers took turns sticking their heads up the ventilation shafts, desperate for a breath of fresh air. It was like a toilet mixed with a sauna, and Hideki gagged. One of the half-naked soldiers spied Hideki and grinned. Hey girls, he called. One of your boyfriends has arrived. Boyfriend? Girls? What was he talking about? And then Hideki saw them. Nurses. Student nurses, like his sister. They were tending to dozens of injured Japanese soldiers, all laid out on boards. The Shikina command post was also a field hospital. Hideki rushed over to the nearest nurse, a girl just a year or two older than he was. She was wrapping a dirty brown bandage around a soldier's wounded arm. Do you have a nurse here named Kimiko? Hideki asked her. She's my sister. The girl shook her head. She hadn't heard of a nurse named Kimiko. Neither had any of the other people Hideki asked. The excitement Hideki had felt on seeing nurses ebbed away like the tide, and the oppressive heat and stink returned. It was too much to hope that he'd find his sister in the first place he looked. Come out, someone yelled in broken Japanese through the cave entrance. Come out, with hands up. Hideki froze. The Americans were here, right outside the cave. They were calling for everyone to come out and surrender. We should do it, Hideki said to a Japanese corporal. We should all surrender. The soldier stepped away from Hideki in disgust. Surrender, he said. Never. Hideki grimaced. The IJA would never give up a command post without a fight, which meant they were all going to die. Hideki grabbed the arm of the first nurse he had talked to. Quick, is there another way out of this cave? He asked. Yes, she told him, at the back. Go, go, Hideki told her. But the patients, the girl said. At the cave entrance, an American soldier peeked inside, his rifle raised. One of the guards at the door slipped out of the shadows and bayoneted him in the gut, and the American screamed. Everybody get out now, Hideki yelled, and suddenly the air itself exploded. Liquid, dripping flames came shooting through the entrance of the cave, torching the guards and anyone else within 20 feet. The sauna at the command post became an oven. A handful of grenades came clattering in the flames, and the cave entrance collapsed in an explosion of rock and dirt. Hideki cried out again for everyone to run, but when no one was listening anymore. Everyone was screaming and yelling and stampeding for the back of the cave. Soldiers pushed civilians out of the way, and wounded men on the floor cried out for help as they were trampled. Hideki pushed the nurses ahead of him toward the back of the cave. Something came pouring down the ventilation shafts above, splashing everyone ahead of him. Hideki recognized the smell from the car that had brought the Japanese photographer to his school. Gasoline. The American monsters were pouring gasoline down the ventilation shafts. A box full of grenades clattered down through the holes, and Hideki knew what came next. He grabbed an empty metal cabinet that stood against the wall and pulled it down on top of himself and the nearest nurse. The cabinet had just banged down on top of them when a kathoom command post became an inferno. The explosion of the grenades touched off the ammunition that the Japanese army had stored in the cave. The ground beneath Hideki and the nurse rocked like an earthquake. The metal cabinet stayed on top of them, protecting them from the worst of it. The nurse next to Hideki screamed. It was only minutes later that Hideki realized he was screaming too. Through their shrieking, they could hear the metal of the cabinet popping as it twisted and warped in the heat. Hideki and the nurse huddled closer as the heat bore down on them. Hideki's bare foot touched the metal cabinet and it burned against his skin like a wood stove. With a start, Hideki remembered the grenade in his pocket. How insulated was a ceramic grenade? Would the intense heat set it off? What if he and the nurse had found a safe place in the fiery cave, only for his grenade to blow them both to pieces? There was no place he could throw the grenade now without lifting the cabinet and exposing them to the flames. Hideki curled himself tight around the grenade instead, hoping to shield the nurse from the blast if it went off. After what seemed like years, the roar of the fire outside died away, and Hideki and the nurse stopped screaming. Hideki's throat was ragged and tight, and his whole body still shook with fear, but he was alive. He put a hand to the cabinet wall. It was hot to the touch. He lifted the cabinet with his back instead, putting Ray's backpack between him and the hot metal. No one had survived except Hideki and the girl. The bodies of the nurses and soldiers lay all around them. The girl retched at the sight. Hideki didn't. Heaven help me, Hideki thought, gotten used to it. Hideki took the girl by the hand and ran as quick as he could for the exit at the back of the cave. So we will stop there. We'll keep posting these up on our YouTube channel. We'll probably finish up this book, I don't know, probably at the end of this week or the beginning of next week. So thanks for tuning on in. Have a great rest of the day. Keep taking care of each other. And remember, range is the way.